Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with the wonderful viewer questions that you so very kindly submitted to this channel a few months back. I am so honored, truly honored to be able to receive these, and that you would be so generous with your time that you would stop by and write these questions and send them to me, and that you would express an interest in whatever it is I might have to say about a given topic. I am truly honored by that, and so I thank you so much. Thank you so much for making me feel welcome like this. I'm so much indebted to you, my dear friends. Thank you. Thank you for this. And so I will try to go through and talk about as many of these questions as possible. I will do my very best. And so that brings us today to the comment and question, or questions I should say, from the Owl Reviewer. So hello, the Owl Reviewer. So thank you very much for your set of questions and your comment. I very much appreciate it. I'll try to go through all of them. You say, I've got a couple of questions that I don't know have been asked, but let me ask them anyway. Number one, now that it's been a year since movie theaters have closed, what is the one or more thing or things you miss about going to the theater? I'll get to the other questions in a second, but oh goodness, yes. So again, of course, times are changing, and of course, given the current world health crisis and all that's going on, I know depending on where you are, circumstances and situations might be different. I get that. But all the same, taking a step back, things have changed, right? Things have changed from, say, prior to this time and now during this time. So when we think about, or when I think about, the types of movie theater going experiences that I might have had, or that I did have, prior to this current world health crisis, perhaps I can say there are a number of things that maybe even now I miss. Perhaps one of the biggest things that I miss is, for instance, in Tokyo, I would maybe go to a movie sometimes on my own, but also there are, I have a number of friends here who are also film lovers or film goers, and if there would be a movie that would be released that would be to our maybe mutual interest, then maybe I would contact my friend, or my friend would contact me, or whatever, and we would arrange a time to meet and go to a particular showing of a film that we'd be interested in watching. And so that would be something of a regular occurrence, or it was a regular occurrence anyway. And so that was something that I enjoyed very much, because it meant I could catch up with an old friend and then also watch the movie which we were mutually interested in. And also what I missed too, or what was so great about those times, was usually after the movie we would go out and go to a restaurant, sit down, have a meal, a nice casual setting in a restaurant, and then have drinks, and then just talk about the film that we just watched, and then talk about other things, talk about life, I miss that so much. It was so wonderful just to be able to connect and talk about the film that we just saw, what it reminded us of what were things that we liked, what we didn't like, what we didn't understand, what we did understand, etc. And we'd exchange those ideas. So much fun, so enlightening. I really miss that. Now, of course, discussions of this sort hopefully will occur, say, in other venues and in other circumstances, and I get that, but there was something very warm and casual, and very laid back and intimate, and also very relaxing at the same time about those sorts of moments regarding a particular movie theater screening. So maybe that's something that one of the things perhaps that I miss. So so that's your first question. Great question, by the way. Thank you very much. Number two, What are some tips you'd give to someone who wants to work in the field of film criticism? I was watching some videos on the set of the show, and Siskel and Ebert were discussing advice for young critics, and some of their advice was fascinating to listen to. Oh, great. What a very fascinating question. Thank you very much for this. I can't speak necessarily, right, from the vantage point of a film critic, because I'm not a film critic or reviewer. I don't consider myself to be, because I'm not. I'm not a professional. But I can speak maybe from someone who reads or watches or consumes, to a certain degree anyway, maybe film criticisms or film reviews of that sort. So maybe from that vantage point, what I usually tend to engage with or become drawn towards as I say, a consumer of film criticism or film reviews, I think I apologize for a sense of me sounding abstract, but I think there's maybe a sense of earnestness. I think I always try to look for a sense of earnestness, a good faith earnestness on the part of the film critic or reviewer regarding that work which this person is focusing the subject of this person's criticism or critique or review. A good faith earnest attempt. And again, if there is a sense of maybe bewilderment or confusion or maybe somewhat not so strong positive outlook on a work, that's fine. That's perfectly fine from my vantage point, and I might agree or disagree with that end point, conclusion point. But what I'm talking about is the approach. If I sense a real good faith, earnest attempt at really trying to grapple with the work, really trying to get at what the work is, what it is that seized that person, what it was that captured that person's imagination, but what were the other things that really maybe hindered or blocked such capturing, as it were, or those sorts of really sincere attempts at trying to get at the heart of what it is that this particular person felt when this person watched the film. That's what I always look for. And from there, that can turn into it can go in many different ways. It can turn into a very a very academic discussion, which is great. It could go into very detailed descriptions here or there. That's great too. But always at the heart, I'm looking for, and I should say, maybe as a consumer or a reader of these works, maybe oftentimes there might be ways that I don't get or I can't quite follow. And that's due to my own faults and my own limits in terms of the levels of my own intelligence, which is very limited. But the point that I wanted to make here is just the sense of an earnest, good faith attempt at trying to get at something, whatever that endpoint conclusion might be. But there's always a good faith attempt at trying to get at something. So, for instance, if I sense maybe a type of, I'm not sure, something that is under maybe some kind of maybe motive or something within the writing or the work that is somehow going against or is in contravention or is not quite in sync with that type of sense of good faith, earnest attempt at engaging with something, then I might have a slightly colder reaction to this particular type of approach because I sense maybe something else going on. But if I can really truly get a sense of there being a good faith, sincere attempt at trying to get at something, whatever that conclusion is, trying to get at what this person feels and trying to explain to what this person thinks about this particular work and explaining it to me in this way, I will respond to that very, very positively. So I think that's something I can suggest maybe as a very broad, abstract thing, is always try to have a good faith, sincere effort, an attempt at engaging with whatever it is that you are engaged with. So again, I apologize for being abstract, but again, I really believe that, and so at least that's from my own vantage point. So, but that's a great question. So that's your second question. And so your third question is, in the age of streaming, how important is it to keep physical media alive as a form of watching films? I've been collecting physical media for years, and there's times I prefer to purchase a film on DVD, Blu Ray, than on streaming. This is a really excellent question, and so I want to thank you very much for this. Well, let me take a step back and say, of course, I love physical media, as I think might be obvious from some of the videos that I tend to upload on this channel. So and that's due to a number of reasons, but perhaps primarily it's just something that I've always been used to. Ever since I was a kid growing up in the 80s, we had VHS rental stores. So ever since I was a kid, it was always physical media, right? The VHS tape, right? And then the format, of course, was evolving over time. Different formats emerged. Even now, new formats are emerging, as we know. And so that's the kind of state of things. But I was always used to that type of process, that ritual, as it were, in terms of getting the physical media, say VHS tape, putting it in the machine, pressing play, waiting a little bit for it to go through the stuff in the beginning and then go into the main attraction, the main film, as it were. So I get used to that as a ritual. And even now I find that very charming and very much part of every film that I watch. I watch it on the player, I put it in, but it does take time to warm up the machine or to find the right place, wait a few seconds for that little thing to stop moving in the corner, or the Criterion C to fill up, you know what I mean? So that becomes part of the fun, actually. And then going to the menu and then pressing play, or that becomes the new ritual, as it were, in terms of physical media as far as Blu Ray. And so that type of tangibility is something that I was always attracted to. But that's not to say that's not the most important thing when it comes to me in watching films. I think, what was I going to say? I was going to say this, which is at the same time, streaming services have so much benefit because of the technological possibilities that they hold, as well as the relative cost benefits that they hold. There are, of course, pluses and minuses on both sides. So if we were to go to the streaming services side for a moment, again, based on my own subjective viewpoint, the wealth or the possibility of the amount of films that one can be accessible to in terms of various streaming services, I mean, this is immense. This is so immense, especially when we consider that physical media does have a limitation when it comes to the wealth of accessibility. It does have a limitation, and I think streaming services in this way can potentially overcome such limitation. And so there is so much out there that can be accessed, and that access can also be combined with, relatively speaking, a very maybe quite reasonably diminished cost point in terms of the subscription fee. I mean, when one thinks of the subscription fee versus when one thinks of what the price is for paying for each Blu Ray of a particular title that would be otherwise found in the library of, say, a streaming service, it's quite a significant difference, right? So you're getting a lot potentially for relatively little, potentially. And I think that type of access is so important. The whole point of cinema is that films need to be watched, and so they need to be watched in this way. Now, of course, with streaming services, there are other things too that become somewhat out of the control from a certain point of view from the consumer, in terms of what types of versions might or might not be available through a certain streaming service. Also, we come to the point now of maybe we are in the world where we need to rely not just on one streaming service but on many in order to feel having a more, say, complete sense of cinema consumption engagement. And that probably is, maybe I cite that here, but that's actually not at all different from, say, relying on different physical media labels to get one's, say, feeling of consumption satisfaction. You know, Criterion, Arrow, Powerhouse, Eureka, etc., as well as maybe some of the major studio labels as well. So we get a variety, not just one, but many, a variety, or a variety pack or mix. So perhaps that's true for both. But there's the cost point and also the wealth of availability, or the potential wealth of availability. And this is really important, really, really important. Also, of course, too, just maybe the generation difference. Maybe now, for instance, I can't speak for everyone, but maybe I have kids and they're growing up and they know this access via, say, the phone or the iPad or this kind of touch access. And maybe less and less over time, maybe this idea of the physical media will be a thing. Again, I'm not sure. I can't read the tea leaves into the future. But what I can say is that there could be also this way in which there might be a generational difference too in how the particular person is approaching this particular media format. So I can completely understand that as well. But at the same time, there is, with physical media, at least anyway, there is a sense of a perceived notion of permanence. It's not quite permanence, but it's a perceived notion of permanence, in that you can try to track down, say, certain versions of a film. Because as we know, sometimes with certain works, one of the very fascinating things is that there might be different versions. And when you have a streaming service, oftentimes, not always perhaps, but oftentimes there might be just one singular version. That might be the final version, but it might not necessarily be the version that one prefers. Or maybe one seeks, because one is curious, one seeks out what some of those other versions are. And sometimes those options might be more available to one if one is searching through the physical media formats rather than through streaming service formats. So that's one possibility in terms of the benefit, practically speaking, in terms of physical media. But I could also say too that, right, I understand too, there are many similarities as well, perhaps more similarities than I might have initially realized, which is that, right, physical media is always about companies that are labels that make business decisions based on what intellectual property rights they can acquire in order to be able to license the particular thing in the form of a product that will be a physical media thing or component or item or article that will be distributed through their distribution channels via their particular business model that they've adopted. So that's the physical media business model, at least as far as I understand it to be, from a consumer perspective. But then the streaming service model, of course, technically speaking, I understand it's different. It operates on a platform, streaming service platform business model. But the concept, I think, is the same, which is you have streaming service businesses or companies that essentially need to acquire or otherwise produce on their own intellectual property rights in order to be able to transmit these in the form that is consistent with that business model. So in fact, they're making decisions on a business level as well as physical media labels making business decisions on a business level. So in that way, they are all, in a very broad manner of speaking anyway, gatekeepers in this particular marketplace of what we understand to be the mass media or the consumer film consumption media market. And so I completely get that. What that means, therefore, is that if one is seeking out the exploration of the vast ocean of cinema, what one has to what I have to remind myself is that even though we might have a wide range of physical media labels, and even though we might have such a wide range and even more emerging streaming services, their combined total, I think, would not necessarily be able to address every single or every single facet of the vastness of cinema. In other words, I still acknowledge that even a wide range of physical media consuming and maybe a wide range of streaming service consuming might still account for maybe only a small fraction of the vastness of cinema, because there's so much out there as well, films that are created that are outside of the so-called mainstream, that are being distributed or shown outside of the mainstream distribution channels. And when I say mainstream, I do include physical media and streaming in that, because those are mainstream, right? And so from a certain point of view anyway. So I think, so I do acknowledge, therefore, that even if one says physical media or streaming or both, there are still many options and opportunities beyond that as well that I think are worth always considering and seeking out. Now, with all that being said, now where does that leave in terms of your great question? I think it is very important to therefore have what, at least from my perspective, a nice balanced approach. Now, at the moment, maybe I'm focusing more on physical media than on streaming, and that's my own personal approach. But I do acknowledge, too, at the same time, for instance, there are some titles that are now out of print that I'm looking for. Some Japanese films, for example, that I have, they used to be on DVD, but now they're out of print and they're too expensive, or they were never on DVD to begin with. But they are available, surprisingly enough, on streaming, very easily so, in Japan's Amazon Prime service, for example. And that's so many out-of-print titles that are otherwise out of print or have never been in print in physical media form are there, to my great surprise and delight. And it costs me, right? I don't have to pay any extra for those particular films anyway. And so I find that to be very beneficial, incredibly beneficial for me in terms of my own cinema journey and trying to continue it. But of course, then I do acknowledge too at the same time that there could be issues. Sometimes I still get buffering issues, freezing up sometimes, which is not always, it's slightly irritating. And there might be certain quality issues as well of that sort. But I think overall, there are pluses and minuses for either camp, which then leads me to the conclusion that I will need, I think ultimately, the balanced approach is the best way to go in terms of physical media and then streaming services as a nice, balanced, comprehensive approach. My own personal approach is far from perfect when it comes to that. It's not at all balanced, but I think I need to try to make it more balanced, especially as times change. And so, I don't know how long I'll be able to sustain this, right? I mean, I can't read the future, right? I don't know, what will happen in terms of my life, my job, my finances, or whatever. I'm not sure. So nothing is set in stone. And so, if there are any changes that might affect my viewing habits here or there, then I'm going to have to change that. But I think overall, I think if one can achieve a balanced approach, and if I can try to achieve a more balanced approach, I think that might be ultimately the way to go. So I'm so sorry to make a very long-winded kind of response to the question, but I think to answer your question, is it important to keep physical media alive? I think yes, it is. It is very important. But at the same time, I do acknowledge too the importance of the emerging markets elsewhere, and those have benefits that physical media sometimes is unable to cover. But physical media does have benefits that the streaming services are unable to cover as well. So in that way, a nice balanced approach, I think, might be the way to go. But again, to each one's own, as it were, because one cinema journey is one's own, in a manner of speaking. It is wholly unique to yourself. And so whatever you're seeking based on your feeling, guidance, your circumstances, your viewpoints, your opinions, whatever that means for you in the long run, and what that leads you to in terms of where you find those solutions. Maybe it's wholly within the streaming service market. That's great. That's perfectly fine. Maybe it's wholly within the physical media market. That's great. That's totally fine too. I think there are, of course, when one compares it, there are, I think, pluses and minuses to either approach, just in terms of maybe things, and maybe those pluses and minuses don't have any significant impact on you and your viewing. If that's the case, fantastic, absolutely fantastic. That's not a problem at all. But at least for me anyway, I think I might need to have a bit of a more balanced approach going forward, especially as times are changing. And also, I have to think too about not just my own needs, but also maybe my needs of my family, perhaps as they are growing, as technology is changing, as they are engaging with technology in a way that maybe is different from the way I'm engaging. So I have to think about that in terms of a family budget as well. So, but these are I think really, these are questions that are continuing to be asked and answered. And as I say, for each of us, we will all have, each of us, our own specific viewpoints. And so whatever your viewpoint is, I celebrate it, I respect it, and I very much support it 100%. And so that is your cinema journey after all, and that is the most important thing. It's your cinema journey and your engagement. I have my cinema journey, of course, and you have yours. And when we come together and discuss these things and exchange ideas, that too is really worthwhile. So again, the media format, this is one of the big topics that is continuing to change. And so we will have to keep an eye out on this as things do change and progress. But the Owl Reviewer, thank you so much for this set of questions. I apologize once again so profusely for my lack of expertise and my shallow nature of responding. I hope you can forgive me, but I did my best, and because they're great questions. And so let me now turn the attention to you and to the rest of the people here. How would you answer these great questions from the Owl Reviewer? I'd love to hear what it is you have to say. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very, very, very much appreciate it. Truly, truly I do. So please, as always, the most important thing is stay strong and stay safe. And cheers.